Hi, Kate here with another video. Hope everyone is doing well. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Helps me build the channel. I'm not making money out of this. I'm doing it as a hobby right now, but I'm working to build up the channel. I have 149 subscribers right now, and I thank everyone who has subscribed. Okay, this video is on Moscow, Russia. I'm American. I spent most of my life in the Northeast U.S. and the New England region in the U.S. I lived for 3 years in Moscow, Russia. This was like a little over 20 years ago in the 90s. I'm dating myself here, but reason why I'm making this video because some YouTubers I watch is Convo Couch, leftist YouTube channel. They're kind of what Democracy Now! Used to be before they were absorbed by the Democratic Party. But Convo Couch, there are two people who do it, Craig Postejardula and Fiorella Isabella. She's a Peruvian American. Anyway, the reason why she moved to Moscow recently, she got a job with RT and she moved to Moscow. She's still doing Convo Couch, but she has some videos. She talks about what life in Moscow is like. It's really interesting. I'm mildly jealous of her. I mean, I'm really happy for her and all that, but I'm mildly jealous for her. Like, Moscow right now is the place to be. Although I kind of wouldn't want to live there now in some ways. I did live there for 3 years. Another YouTuber, there's John Mark Dougan, who's an ex-South Florida cop. He basically was involved in Epstein, investigating the Epstein case, and he uncovered ties between local corrupt politicians in the area and Epstein, and he pissed off too many of the wrong people. He has a bunch of charges against him. It was pretty obviously fabricated. Russia offered him political asylum, actually, so he's now living in Moscow. In his YouTube, he's collaborating with Graham Phillips, a British journalist, who also has run into problems with the British state. Anyway, John Mark Dougan has videos on life in Moscow, what it's like. Really interesting. With these people, and I'm relying on other sources as well, Moscow apparently is a vastly different place than when I was there. It's like night and day. According to some of these people, Moscow, Russia has a large brew pub scene. Like, what? I was shocked. Like, Moscow, I know, is vastly different. There are zillions of Mexican restaurants. There's a large foodie scene in Moscow, apparently. Like, you look up Mexican restaurants in Moscow, Russia, you'll come up with several dozen. There was one Mexican restaurant in Russia when I was there. I'll talk about that. An interesting story behind that. But it's like not Russia. Moscow apparently is a large consumer society, consumer culture. It was just starting to develop when I was there. It was like a totally different scene. So anyway, it's really fascinating what Moscow is like now compared to what it was like when I was there. I'd like to go back, not to live, but anyway. So, background, I am trans. I presented as a male when I was there. Would have been a lot different. But okay, so I'm going to tell how I ended up there is really complicated, long story. My family moved around a lot growing up. I don't really feel I'm from anywhere. I never felt I really fit in no matter where I was. We lived in a couple different places in the Northeast U.S. I always felt like an outsider. Most of the time, we lived in a small town, central Vermont. I love Vermont, but I hated the town my parents lived in. It's like a factory farming town with less than 3,000 people. And stereotype, young people can't wait to get out. I won't mention the name of the town. Okay, so I graduated from college, New Hampshire. A long, complicated story, but after school, I lived in that town in New Hampshire for 9 months. I worked as a dishwasher for a restaurant while I was job hunting, looking for a real job, which never really came through. After that, I worked for 5 months for a ski school in New Hampshire. I don't ski. I'm like the only person in Vermont who doesn't ski, but I was like a tutored kids who were like, they want to leave from their home school where they were studying skiing at the school. It's like a boarding school. And I supposedly tutored the kids. The kids were totally apathetic. They were there for the skiing and only skiing. They weren't really interested in anything else. But anyway, after that ended, I moved back in with my parents for close to 2 years. I generally got along with them. Wasn't really a great situation, but I generally got along with them. I felt increasingly awkward. I was unemployed for a long time. I had jobs. One job I worked as a bricklayer's assistant. I was there for 2 weeks. I had to lug these really heavy bricks up this construction site, this job site, lug it up like 2 flights of stairs. It was horrible. My dad wanted me to do it for a career. He loved the building trades, and he was super enthusiastic about it. Oh, you're a great opportunity. No, I hated it. It was, for me, I mean, I really admire and respect people who are good at that kind of stuff. It wasn't for me. It was a temp job, like a temp to hire type thing. I lasted 2 weeks. Wasn't my kind of thing. After that, I worked for a time for a company called Vermont Castings. They make wood stoves. They're famous for making wood stoves. If you can figure out what town I'm talking about, I won't mention the name of the town. Anyway, Vermont Castings is famous for making these cast iron wood stoves. Really good quality stoves. I worked in the foundry for also 2 weeks. Basically, the job started at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I got out 2 something. It was really broiling hot, and the job I had to take a hammer and spend all day banging metal components into shape. At the end, and it would, like in the morning, I'd wake up and my hand would be frozen into place. Like I was starting to get carpal tunnel syndrome. Again, my dad wanted me to do it for a career. Oh, it's a great opportunity. No, I fucking hate that stuff. I mean, I respect people who are really good at that stuff. It wasn't for me at all. So I had a variety of other jobs. I worked for a moving company for a couple of weekends. I worked as a dishwasher for several different restaurants in the town. Alongside, I got into a school district. I worked as like a long-term substitute teacher. One teacher at the school, a couple towns away, was out with a freak tennis accident, freak weird tennis accident. I filled in his classes for the semester. And then I worked on and off a few more semesters for that same school. It was horrible. I had huge discipline problems. If I had to do it again, I'd do it differently, but the kids were just insane. I couldn't control a classroom. It was a pretty horrible situation. So then around that point, I sent my resume into the Ministry of Education, Beijing, China, just as a joke. As a joke, and the game was sort of as a joke, and the game was going to come of it. To my surprise, they called like the city, some institute, like a small school in a city in inland China, Xi'an, China, called me at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they asked me if I was interested in the job. I said, yeah, sure. And then about a month later, they called me back again at a different time. We talked back and forth, and basically they offered me a job teaching in China. It's different now. They have 2 categories. Back then they had 2 categories. They had a foreign teacher, foreign expert. Foreign expert, it meant if you had a master's degree, I had a master's degree, it meant they paid for your trip to China and back. They paid for your trip. So yeah, sure, okay. I was nervous as hell about it, but I went to China. I was in Xi'an, in the Shanxi province. It's in the map, it looks like it's the middle central part of the country. It's what they call northwest China. Historically, the northwest of the Han area. There's a huge region, the Xinjiang huge region to the west of it. But the historical northwest of the Han area, great place for Chinese culture, Chinese history, center of Han and Dong dynasties and whatever. Anyway, I'll talk about my experiences in China in a later video. Just saying, I was there in the first year I was there. First 2 years were probably the happiest time in my life. I had a lot of friends there. I liked the first place I was at. I taught peasant kids. I was literally the first Westerner they had ever seen in person. It was a really interesting experience. Second year wasn't quite the same thing. I didn't really like the place I was teaching at, but I made a lot of friends. It wasn't cool to have Chinese friends, but I did anyway. There was a tight-knit expat community, community in that community in Xi'an. Everybody sort of knew each other. There were a couple restaurants or bars where the expats would hang out. Mostly teachers, but entirely. There were different, there were a lot of missionaries, crypto missionaries, like the Postal Institute, what they call, I don't know what they taught. They're called, like a small university called Postal Institute, where a lot of foreign teachers there, they were Jesuits. The Jesuits had that place sewn up. I don't know what was going on there, but there were Jesuits teaching there. There were a lot of Christian fundamentalist missionaries, young British girls used to run this pretty white missionary group. They knew right away I wasn't one of them, and they kind of stayed away from me. Technically, missionary activity was illegal, and there was a semi underground missionary network. I stayed away. I stayed away from them. But anyway, I had a huge amount of fun there. It was a great experience. Didn't pay a lot, but it was a lot of great experience. I traveled basically. I was there first year. Came back that summer for like August part of September. Went back to China the second year. It was a little different the second year, but especially the first year, I traveled almost literally every city in China. It was cheap and easy to travel, really cheap. It's probably a lot different now. Even Xi'an, where I lived, there's a guy on Facebook on Left Book who apparently is in Xi'an right now. And I told him I was there years ago. Oh, years ago. What clubs did you used to go to? Like, what? There were a couple of clubs. There were actually club scene there, believe it or not. But it's like night and day. I mean, you didn't go clubbing. Apparently, this guy goes wild clubbing in Xi'an. It's a lot different, totally different scene than when I was there. Okay, anyway, I had this first year I traveled with this person, a Russian student who she was a grad student in Moscow. She was sort of taking time off, whatever. I kind of had a crush on this person. She invited me, I won't give her name, she invited me to come to Moscow after the end of my first year. She went back to Moscow the first year. Then I came back, she wasn't there, but she invited me to come to Moscow after my second year in China, which I did. So I took the train there. My parents wanted me to come back to Vermont. Oh, you had a great experience. Now you have to make preparations to come back home. No, no way. I did not want to go back to the dishwashing jobs and whatever. No, no way. Or the substitute teaching or whatever. So I went. Some Chinese friends saw me off in Beijing. Went to Beijing, got all the visas and such. We need to go to Moscow. Went to the Russian embassy. I remember they were playing Pink Floyd there inside the embassy. It was kind of interesting. Anyway, I got my visas. I got on the train to go to Moscow, Trans-Siberian. I actually took the wrong train. I took the Trans-Mongolian. Went across Mongolia. I didn't know they were going to do that. So I had to pay like a $50 visa, Mongolian visas. Pretty interesting. So anyway, trip, I believe, if I remember, took 5 days from Beijing to Moscow. We went across Mongolia, which is pretty wild. See, as I said, I spent a large part of my life in a small town in Vermont, and I was amazed I was in China. Like, holy shit, I'm actually in China. Or like, holy shit, I'm in Mongolia, or I'm in Russia. I still can't believe it to this day. It was a thrill. It was an endless thrill for me just being there. Okay, so we went across, went through Mongolia. I think, if I remember, it took 2 days, maybe 3 days. I don't. Yeah, 2 days. It was rolling grassland. There were yurts, yurt villages I passed by. Rolling grasslands, miles and miles of grassland. It's every type of Mongolia, I guess. Kind of rolling hills, I remember. We stopped in Ulaanbaatar, train station Ulaanbaatar, for about 40 minutes. It was kind of interesting. Everything's in Russian. Then it was in Cyrillic writing. I didn't see that much. I wandered around the train station for about 40 minutes. Got back on the train, continued. I sat, part of the time I sat next to a young British girl. British young people have something called somebody have a gap year, like students like a year off before going on to university or whatever. I've kind of had pretty much of a gap life, actually, but anyway. So we played cards and 21 ever. She was coming back from, young girl, Bridget. She was coming back from traveling around the world. She was still working, traveling. She was in Australia, New Zealand. She was on her way back. Her parents were not too happy about her doing this. They were more traditional. They wanted her to settle down, get married, or whatever. She didn't really want to do that right away. Anyway, she was coming back to the UK. She was going to stay. She wanted to be an accountant. Okay. Anyway, so we hung out and we played cards. We passed through Siberia. Now this is wild. We passed through these small towns in Siberia. I don't know, several dozen small towns. And okay, the train I took was packed with people, Chinese people, mostly Chinese women, some men, young women, young men. They were selling stuff out the train, out the windows, in these small towns and stores. We stopped at these towns in Siberia. They're entirely ethnic Russians. I didn't notice any minority groups, entirely ethnic or non-Russian groups, entirely ethnic Russians. Russian women, very heavy-set Russian women, and Chinese people would sell underwear, like bras, out the windows. and it was wild. There were people were super aggressively selling things, and then people were super aggressively buying things. Like the Chinese people had a super aggressive drive to sell things, and Russian people were desperate to buy things. So there were almost mob scenes. I remember people were frantically selling stuff out the windows, and people were frantically buying stuff, and it was wild. Think of all these people, Chinese people on the train. We'd take it to like Irkutsk or someplace and go back, like keep making the loop. I think they did okay. I mean, a couple of the cars were packed with clothes or goods to sell on the train. It was interesting. It was pretty wild. I heard there was a knife. I didn't see it. There was a knife fight. I didn't see this. The guidebook says the Trans-Mongolian is kind of dangerous. Again, this was years ago. I'm sure that's a lot different now. But the guidebook said you got to be careful being on the Trans-Mongolian. Knife fights and shootings happen. Okay. I believe it. It was pretty wild. When we passed through, yeah, forgot to mention. When we passed into Mongolia, we did at 2:30 in the morning. They deliberately arranged like crossings like that. We had changed the railroad gauge. They arrange crossings like that, so when they get people trying to smuggle stuff, they're groggy and half asleep. I've heard that. So they around 2:30 in the morning, we crossed into Mongolia. It was surreal to change gauge. It was kind of surrealistic. It was kind of interesting. Then we passed through Mongolia, out of Mongolia into Russia, and passed through like the topography in Russia, kind of like the U.S., northeast U.S. somewhat. A lot of birch trees, huge number of birch trees. That's kind of one of the symbols of Russia. Lots of birch trees. We stopped at zillions of these small towns in Siberia, medium-sized towns. In Siberia, we passed by Lake Baikal, Irkutsk, we didn't stop. As far as I remember, we didn't stop in Irkutsk. I don't remember, but we crossed the Volga River. That was a thrill for me because we were in Russia. We were in Europe. Crossed the Volga River, we were in Europe. Anyway, oh yeah, I forgot to mention I was almost broke, by the way. I was almost broke. I had money waiting for me in Moscow. I had some money waiting for me in Moscow, but I didn't have a lot of cash on me. I was kind of nervous, and I was just, I enough for some food after I paid $50 to get the Mongol visa. Anyway, I got in Moscow. My friend was waiting for me, who I met in China, was waiting for me at the Kievskaya Vokzal, Kievskaya train station in Moscow. She met, and we went. I stayed at her apartment with her parents for a week or so. It was kind of outer part of Moscow. These big, tall apartment buildings. They have I forget what it is. They have Khrushchev buildings and Brezhnev buildings built during different eras. According to the elevator technology they had, the real high rises or Brezhnev buildings out a little further. They all kind of look the same, but it's nice apartments. Anyway, she got me a place to live. In Russia, there's what they call a hozaika, that is hostess. That is often an older woman. They have an institution called a babushka, a grandmother. They're not always grandmas, but babushki plural. They're an institution in Russian culture. The babushkis, you can pick this up really fast. Every business, every family, every place has a babushka who yells at people to wipe their feet, who keeps things orderly. Her official job may vary, but they really unofficially run Russia in a lot of ways. Anyway, so I stayed with this woman named Maria Fyodorovna. I had my own room. She had a room. She was, I guess, in her 70s. She's long gone. I think she was in her 70s by then. Really nice lady. She didn't speak any English. I originally didn't speak any Russian. It kind of worked out. I would pay her by the week for staying there. So what happened? Okay, so I got there. My relation with my friend didn't really work out. We had a couple big fights, and it didn't. I would bump into her once in a while, but there was some. She got me settled in Moscow anyway, and I got a job. I know shit. I'm gonna have to find a job here, and I got a job really easily. I got a job. I teach English. It was ridiculously easy to find a job. Now, in the U.S., I was used to sending out dozens and dozens of resumes and doing anything I could to find a job. There was really nothing. Job market really dried up. A real struggle to find anything. In Moscow, all I had to do was make a few phone calls. I got to get a job teaching English. A huge demand to learn English at that time. And first school, there were lots of schools, English schools. They would come and go. Most of these schools were like cowboy operations, basically. Some of them were connected with the Russian mafia. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the first school I worked for, I got a job, a school called Polyglot. The two people ran it was a woman, young woman who had worked for Voice of America. She kind of left. I think she said they were too overtly propagandistic, which is definitely true. And she ran with this British guy who was kind of a dickhead. They didn't really, I don't think that they hated each other. Two people ran the school. Anyway, this school, Polyglot, gave me a group of students around Moscow. And I would take the Moscow subway and meet these students. I had a few like group classes, but mostly one-on-one Russian business people. Now, the context, have to mention, is it was an utter economic collapse. Now, I'm going to say sound like very negative about Moscow, and I think it's a lot different now. Russia had just gone through enormous economic collapse, shock therapy. After the Soviet Union collapsed, like half the population was thrown into poverty, extreme poverty. For a while in the 90s, Russia had the lowest male life expectancy rate in the world, 56. There was massive alcoholism, heroin addiction, AIDS, you name it. Utter collapse. Vast areas of Russia, like employers would be like wage arrears, like a lot of towns. Not so much in Moscow or the big cities, but out in smaller towns, like plants, factories, would pay their workers only like every 6 months or so. I don't know how people survived. It was a horrible situation. Also, Russia was very much a gangster state. I didn't see this myself, but no, every 2 weeks there would be a major car bombing, elevator bombing, carjacking, some weird gangland shootout. I didn't see it myself. Some friends of mine did see shootouts. I could keep up with what's going on, even if I originally didn't speak a lot of Russian. There's English language newspapers, the Moscow News, and Moscow Times, English language Moscow Times. It was owned by Americans, and most of the writers were Americans who lived there. It was kind of mainstream, pro-capitalist, pro-privatization stuff, but it would tell you what's going on. There's also The Exile. Capital Xile, Matt Taibbi. Then I was there when Matt Taibbi lived in Moscow. Matt Taibbi and Mark Ames ran it. It was kind of left wing. Had a sarcastic, sort of sleazy sense of humor. It was kind of trippy. And these two two sources would counterbalance each other. I could more or less follow what was going on, and also my students would fill me in. So anyway, yeah, I had students on the Moscow subway. The Moscow subway, by the way, is probably the best in the world. Even then, after Russia had been through total economic collapse, the subway worked really well. A train would come every 2 minutes, and no matter where you were, every 2 minutes. The central ring areas built during the Soviet era, of course, built by Khrushchev under Stalin. Like Khrushchev was the party, was basically the mayor of Moscow. He built it under Stalin. They did a really good job. Looks like a cathedral. Moscow is really famous for that. The central parts of it look like a cathedral. It's really, really interesting. Everything else was falling apart, but they did keep the subway going. As I said, get a little disjointed here, sorry, but half the population fell into extreme poverty, while a small group of oligarchs being super wealthy. There was shock therapy. Three guys, Jeffrey Sachs, Gunnar Zoslin, Yevgeny Gaidar, three guys behind the shock therapy, total crash privatization. They had this, some of my students explained to me, they had these auctions, like three big auctions when they privatized the economy, basically, and people who were very well connected were able to buy up a lot of it, became billionaires overnight, buy up chunks of the economy, while most people didn't really understand any of this and fell into extreme poverty. It was horrific. Parts of Moscow were packed with beggars. You could see it, really pathetic, really sad. One area, I remember students, one area, I don't remember, a student kind of lived in that, one student who worked kind of in that area. So I would have a habit of carrying around rotten fruit with me. I would get an apple like a couple of days after I should have thrown it out. And I threw it in this small dumpster, and a bunch of babushki, elderly women dove for it, like, diving for rotten fruit. That was horrible. And that's the situation Russia was in. Now, my students weren't always in that situation. I worked with mostly, there was something of a relatively prosperous middle class. Not everyone was in extreme poverty, but there was that element there. The large part of the country was. Anyway, small group of oligarchs and super wealthy. There was also a semi-gangster, what they call Novi Ruski, like Russian yuppies, sort of they were basically more of a semi-gangster business class. In fact, businessmen and mafioso kind of meant the same thing. It was really interesting. Despite all this, I felt mostly safe there, safer than any American city. Anyway, I'm getting off. Yeah, if there were some places could be a little dangerous if they knew I was a foreigner, I wasn't Russian, I would have money and they weren't. They didn't, locals didn't. So there's a couple of situations were a little uneasy. I had to be a little careful. But most part it was okay. Generally, city center I felt far safer than the American city, actually. Okay. Um, so I had students. The school, different schools they worked with would give me students. Students would sign up with the school. I would come to usually to their offices, sometimes their house, their apartment, or where they lived, often to their offices. I would give a lesson. I would give a lesson. They'd give me these textbooks. British companies, Oxford and Cambridge and Longman, if I remember the main textbook lines, and they'd give me these textbooks. I'd go through some lessons. I'll admit I'm not the world's greatest ESL teacher. I'm not really a professional ESL teacher, but it was something to do to support myself when I was overseas, when I was outside the U.S. Some students in schools really liked me, some didn't. The last one at school I worked for really liked me. I won't mention their name, but okay. So I had a group of students. I worked. I had students. Sometimes I'd teach people, and the students would often, they signed a contract with the school. But if they got to know me and like me, the contract would expire. We would have like a one-on-one classes. I'd get paid more. The school would just be a middleman. Seriously, all they were middleman. Maybe they'd give you some textbooks or stuff. They operate as middlemen. Okay, so some Russian culture picked up what is pretty interesting. It was interesting to drive through Moscow, especially early morning or late at night. I took a car ride. I didn't drive myself there. I didn't want to, but I took a car ride through Moscow. It was kind of slightly surrealistic. It's hard to explain. Russian people are culture. How can I explain the culture? Some natural introverts. I'm kind of that way myself, so I can identify. Russian people are natural introverts, reserved. Like you can travel when I drive through Moscow, you see people like small knots of people talking in the streets. It doesn't seem like a totally open culture, open society, or open culture, I guess. People are huddled. Russian people are very, very warm when you get to know them really well and you're brought into into their network, into their circle, their circle of friends. They're very warm, but outside, not so much. There's a story that Russians feel a little awkward among strangers and people they don't know that well. There's a story that American companies were in Moscow, they would start to have a tradition of like mandatory Friday mixers, like Friday day before the weekend. They'd have like a mandatory mixer. People would have to get to know their other co-workers and mix. And Russian employees felt really uncomfortable with that. I kind of agree. Like I get that. Like even in the U.S. we have these like I've had lots of jobs where you have like corporate bonding exercises or your trust, which is where you play trust games. I freaking hate that stuff. It's superficial. It's bullshit. But your American culture is really big in that kind of stuff. I hate this stuff. Lots of activist meetings. They always have like a breakout meeting where you're supposed to breakout groups and talk about something with your neighbors and stuff. I hate that. It doesn't have any purpose to it too. I hate that stuff. Russian people are kind of like that. They're natural introverts. American culture is more like type of outgoing, very outgoing, but it's more superficial. Like people are surprised, but Europeans and Russians are honestly surprised by Americans. Americans will act like really friendly. Oh, I thought this, but doesn't mean they really want to be friends or close to you either. So Europeans and Russians are honestly puzzled by that in a lot of ways. Okay, So yeah, Russia also has a code of chivalry. Like a man is never late for a woman, even by like 30 seconds. You're just not late for an appointment with a woman. If you are, it's a mortal insult. It's an absolute mortal insult. Feminism, like Western feminism, is not popular. It was not popular in Moscow at all. Like this figure, Alexandra Kollontai, she's probably popular in the Western left. Early Bolshevik feminists. Interesting stuff. Russian people know about her, but don't know about her feminism. She's known as ambassador, as diplomat. She was ambassador in Norway or something, if I remember. Russian people aren't aware she was a feminist and don't seem particularly interested in that. It's kind of interesting cultural differences. So a man's never late for an appointment with a woman. There's also a thing when you walk, a man and woman walk down a street. The man was faced on the right to defend people, to defend his woman against any attackers from the street. Also comes from the military, so a man who's in the army, the conscription. If you're in the army, you could salute an officer on one hand, hold your girlfriend's arm on the other hand. It's kind of interesting. It's really strict. There's a flower culture, which I didn't totally understand, but some Russian women are really into this. Flower symbolism, language of flowers. Each flower would have a different meaning. Some Russian women I knew were really into this. Russian women or women friends were more into makeup and cosmetics, and my American women friends were. There's an interesting difference. Yeah, it's considered very rude in Russia to sit with your legs crossed, like with your heel facing outward, the ball, your ankle on your knee. Very rude. Americans do this all the time, and Russian people are shocked. Like, why you just don't do that? So there's a strict code of etiquette, code of chivalry, code of etiquette. There's a major cultural misunderstanding. So I picked that was interesting. There are some cultural differences. They're subtle. Some are subtle. Some are not. Okay, so as I said, I was teaching these students. I made friends with some of the students, some I didn't. The students would come and go. As I said, there was a lot of organized crime there. It was a gangster state in some ways. There's this one student, Dmitry, I taught. Interesting guy, late 20s, late 20s. He was trained as a scientist. The Russian scientific establishment, which students were scientists, were treated very well. In the Soviet period, when there was utter collapse. Scientists, they had a job, they were making lucky if they made $50 a month or something. So this guy, Dmitry, he had some business importing, exporting meat to Europe. I don't know exactly what he did, and he didn't really ask. Okay, so story. I was working for this first school I worked for. I had a friend, American friend, Nick and Tanya. Nick, older guy, he was Russian American. He had come back to Russia for the first time. His father, who was older still, died years ago. His father, I think, had him when he was in his 70s or something. But his father was an officer in the White Army during the Russian Civil War. Served under Denikin in the Russian Civil War. So this guy, Nick's father, after the Bolsheviks took over, went to Australia, then went to California, and he married a much younger Russian woman. So my friend Nick, not his real name, went to Russia and did what his father doing. He married this Russian woman who was much younger, and they seemed like they had a nice relationship. They got married. They went to their wedding, Russian Orthodox wedding. They went there. Okay, so this guy Nick, not his real name, he went to the States for a month. By the way, he lost like $1,000. He brought $1,000 in cash. He was going to just bring it home, and the customs found it and took it. I'm sure they kept it for themselves. There are other ways you could have transferred money that way, but he just had it in his wallet and lost it. Anyway, he went back to see. Anyway, while he was away, he gave me some of his students to teach. While he was away for a month, everything was still going on during Christmas holiday. Well, it's Christmas in the West. It's not a thing in Moscow, nothing in Russia. So I taught some of his students. So one of his students was Dmitry. And as I said, Dmitry was trained as a scientist. Scientific establishment had collapsed. He worked in this export-import business. And so I had met him like three times a night, three times evening. His office was in the Moscow Commercial, place called the Moscow Commercial Club. I had to get there. It was a compound, walled-in compound. I had to pass through three security checkpoints before I got to him. I got to his office first. They let me in the gate, and another guy I had to call in. I came to the third gate. I had to sign in, come up to his office. The other part of the building apparently was a casino and a restaurant. So I thought Dmitri. He was actually a nice guy. He was apparently making a huge amount of money. He was a lifetime member of the Forest Hills Tennis Club in New York and Queens. And he would go to London, go to New York pretty often. Problem is he didn't speak English pretty well, so that's where I came in. I talked with him, tried to help him build up his vocabulary. Interesting guy, a little eerie, the fact that I passed the whole super security thing I had to go through. I never experienced that before. Another thing, I actually had taught two young women who were Tatars, Tatar nationality. They worked for this accounting firm or something. They were really nice people. Okay, so their office was on top of a casino, another casino, and so apparently, I went there. I forget what happened. I went there. The lesson had been canceled. When I came back, there was like a dead body, a dead body on the road. So I came back for my next lesson. Then when I got there, so no, then I hear lessons canceled. So I came back a few days later for the next scheduled lesson, and they told me the story. Apparently, they saw this guy killed. The owner of the casino got into some kind of fight with local mafia, and the guy did like what they called didn't know what was happening. Somebody was doing like a funny dance in the parking lot. Like dancing around, doing a funny dance, and they realized what happened. He had been shot full of bullets. He had some run-in with the local mafia. That was an interesting story. So I've heard stories like that from a variety of people. It was pretty wild. Okay, yeah. Now, there was a nightlife. There were restaurants and bars. Russian people, they're kind of reserved. They didn't go to bars. It's very much of a drinking culture. But Russians wouldn't really go to bars. It wasn't a big thing as far as I know. There were beginning to be more bars that were coming with the expats there. There were a couple of Irish. There was an called the Irish Pub. There were a couple of Irish pubs. I went to one. They were a good place. You can meet expats, journalists, or people doing some interesting stuff. There was a place called the John Bull Pub, which was by Kuznetsky Most subway station. Most means bridge, by the Kuznetsky Bridge, old historic bridge. Anyway, so it was like sort of enclave, a bunch of buildings around it, and there was a train station, and there was a place called the John Bull Pub, which obviously was a British pub. There was a bombing like at 4 a.m. one day, sometime before I left, 4 a.m. Looks like, okay, there's Russia, there's a tradition called, when I was there, something called Krisha. Krisha means roof, means roof, protection. So there are zillions of, in Moscow, there are zillions of private security firms, which are barely disguised protection rackets. So apparently the John Bull Pub had gotten behind in their Krisha and their protection money. So it was a warning. They didn't want to kill anybody, didn't want to hurt anybody, but the bombing at 4 a.m. It was a warning. So I don't know what happened. What happened after that? There was a big thing. There was a club called the Hungry Duck. Name was in English. In Russian it's called Luni Utka, but the name was in English. The Hungry Duck. Expat hangout, or Russian hangout. It was a pretty wild place. Started by a Canadian. I'd been there a bunch of times. It was a really super wild place. It was started at 11, and people it would start at 11, and people would drift in earlier. Would start like exactly around 11 or so. People would sing ironically, the Soviet national anthem. They'd stand on tables, stand on this big, literally stand on tables, and sing the Russian national, the Soviet national anthem. You know, it was kind of interesting. And then it would get cool. We'd pack with people like around 1, 2 in the morning. We'd pack with people. It was a pretty wild place. Matt Taibbi used to go there a lot. He'd write about it. Sometimes fights would break out. I was there once when some really nasty, it was like a Western barroom brawl scene. Apparently, their own security had quit that night, or they'd run out in their protection money or something. And I got out of there, but all of a sudden people started punching each other. There's broken glass everywhere. And I left at that point. There were other times I've been there. It was kind of a good time, good place to get really super drunk. Little, women felt a little uneasy there, which is totally understandable. There's one time I was there with a couple other teachers, and a group of women, young women were there, and they were kind of flirtatious. I got some danger signals. Turns out they were deaf-mute. They were deaf-mute sex workers. During the Soviet period, handicapped people couldn't live in Moscow. Deaf, mute, blind, whatever, you could. Moscow was a showcase city, and people with handicaps were not allowed to live there. So they could live in Moscow then. I don't know where these people were from, someplace else, but they came in. They didn't speak English. They spoke a little English. They were deaf and mute, and they were pretty much picked up that they were sex workers. It was a little eerie. I kind of know it's okay. I got some weird vibes from that, but there were some situations like that. Anyway, I presented as a male. I have to emphasize this. It would have been a totally different experience. Okay, so I remember one time I left the Hungry Duck on 4 o'clock in the morning, which is the usual time, kind of coming down the hangover, bleary-eyed. I have to make my way back to where I lived. And I got into some weird, some guy, like, all these shops were just starting to open. These, like, kiosks, small shops or kiosks nearby were starting to open. This gangster guy, kind of acted like he wanted to make friends with me. He was sort of weird. He almost pushed me into his car, and a young girl was there, his girlfriend or somebody. He apparently wanted me to have sex with this girl. I didn't, and his girl said in English, "This is very dangerous for you." I said, "Yeah, no kidding." I got out of there. Something weird was going on. This is weird. So anyway, it kind of it was an odd scene. Fair number of restaurants. After the Soviet collapse, most Russian people didn't go out to restaurants. Or sort of dangerous mafia dominated places. You didn't really go out that much. But I did go to a bunch of these restaurants, Moscow restaurants. They were very expensive. You could drop in $80 to $200 easily, dinner for two. I remember this one place. I didn't go out that and go to restaurants that often, but they were there. There was a place called the Azteca, a Mexican restaurant. I think it was at the time the only Mexican restaurant in Moscow. It was run by this apparently Swedish organized crime group. Their motto said in English, "We treat our guests like the Aztecs treated their gods." I thought that was kind of funny. If you can't pay your bill, they cut your heart out with an obsidian knife. I thought that was kind of funny. I went there. Employees working there were young people from Cuba. It was really interesting. I wish I'd talked to these people more, but they were they spoke English really well. There were seemed like there was a fair amount of racism there. There was one thing. I think it was April 9th. It's some international right-wing holiday. It came out from the American neo-Nazi movement, Ruby Ridge or Waco, Texas disaster. So April 9th is some kind of holiday. Anyway, April 9th there were some Russian right-wing ultra-nationalist groups. I saw them. They'd rampage on this one area in Moscow. There was a street called Novy Starty Arbat, Old Arbat Street. It was a pedestrian malls and tourist area. There were lots of kiosks or tourist wonder shops and tourist stuff. There was next to Novy Arbat, a New Arbat Street, which is sort of like a fashionable shopping area. It was parallel, but Starty, I would hang out at Starty Arbat sometime after my lessons, and there were a couple of kiosks. You could buy CDs and any band, any music genre imaginable. Anyway, one day I was there. A group of like fascist groups were rampaging. They apparently didn't do any damage, but they were like marauding down the street. cops kind of nodded to them. Some of the shop owners nodded to them. A little scary. They didn't bother me at all. I had a friend, an American teacher, who was mostly Italian background, but he looked Jewish, stereotypically Jewish. And I was with him on the subway on the metro at the time. Once these right-wing guys came by, and it was a tense situation. Like they targeted him. They didn't do anything. They started to approach him, and it looked a little tense. And somebody said, "Nah, leave him alone," and they did. But I think it was going to be could have been a bad situation because he looked Jewish, and they targeted him for that. What I've heard, it's not this way now in Moscow. They suppressed this element. There was a time when, Russian society had collapsed, really. The whole ideology that for 70 years was gone. Their society was adrift, and these elements came to the fore. Toward a little while before I left, I remember there was an incident two incidents. One, a skinhead group had apparently felt like there were a fair number of African students in Moscow. There was a fair number. They felt like throwing a woman in the river. They did a young black woman. They threw an African woman. They threw her in the Moskva River for some reason. Stuff like this probably happened a lot. But fortunately for her, this young woman she was actually the daughter of the Kenyan ambassador, and she was on the Kenyan Olympic swim team, so she survived really well. If she wasn't the daughter of the Kenyan ambassador, nobody would have heard the incident probably. It was an incident. Another around the same time, a black U.S. Marine who was connected with the U.S. Embassy was beaten up by one of the skinhead groups. That created something of an international incident. What I've heard people telling me, it's not this way now. There isn't really. Fiorella Isabel from Convo Couch is Peruvian American. She said she hasn't noticed any racism. It's hard to say, but there was a fair amount when I was there. There were Georgians from the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. A lot of Georgians living in Moscow. The police would hit them up for bribe money. I used to see this all the time. Like Straf, like fine. Didn't these guys bribe money? They would need a visa. This wasn't the Soviet Union anymore. They would need a visa or permit to live in Moscow. They had one, but the police would find some minor discrepancy, and they have to constantly pay fines like a couple of times a day, literally. The police, on the Soviet, I don't know much about the police in the Soviet period. They were called militia. Militia. They originally a worker militia. Well, they're still called. When I was there, they're still called the militia. They were more guys from the countryside they had hired. They're not brutal, corrupt, not typical police, not that bright. They were everywhere. They were fairly brutal characters. From what I've heard, they pretty much left me alone. If you're like a white person, if you look Russian or Western European, they'll kind of leave you alone. But I actually stole this guy's cap. A cop was asleep, maybe he was drunk on the subway. He had this cap, I still have it actually, had the Soviet insignia. I'll get it. So I saw this cop one day asleep on the subway. I was going home, and he might have been asleep or drunk. I waited till my stop. It was right before my stop. I stole his cap. His cap wasn't on his head. It was it was next to him. He took his cap off. It was next to him. I took it and just went out the subway. And I stole his hat. I still have it here. Has the Soviet hammer and sickle. It had a bunch of pins. Some of them hammer. One was a hammer and sickle. A bunch of pins. My dad took it off. I took those off. I brought it home to my parents. My dad took some of the insignia off. He kept it somewhere. I wish he didn't do that. But so anyway, I still have my Moscow policeman's cap. I could wear it here. Anyway, so it was an interesting story. There are stories now. There's a lot of corruption, a lot of brutality. Rape was endemic. Okay, some stories. And again, this is a time when Russian society essentially collapsed. So rape was kind of endemic story, especially from the police. Story, a woman friend of a friend told me the story, and I believe her. Some woman, about a year or so earlier, her apartment had been burglarized. It's in Russia. You don't call, if anything bad happens, you don't call the police. Don't go anywhere near the police. They'll make things a lot worse. It's kind of similar. It's similar in the U.S., not quite as bad, but kind of similar. Moscow, you don't contact the police. They'll make things worse. If you need for like insurance purposes or something, you can file out a police report, but the police are guaranteed to make things a lot worse. So this woman's apartment was burglarized, so the cop came and asked her to get in a car and get in his car, fill out an accident report, fill out like a report. So she did, and he raped her in the squad car, in the car. There were so many situations like that. Another friend, a Russian woman, I'll call her Irina, not her real name. She had a visa and everything to come to the U.S. and to get to like an exit visa to leave Russia, you had to get like a document from the local police saying you didn't have a record and you were a good citizen and all that stuff. So the police said, yeah, we'll do this to you. We'll do this for you. And in Russia, if you want somebody to do anything, like you have to give them a favor, a bottle of vodka, or give them something. It's not really bribery. It's kind of transactional. You ask somebody to do something, you offer something back. So anyway, the police said, we'll do this. So she came to come to the police station at this time, and so she brought a bottle of vodka with her, and she came to the police station. So they led her to the basement. And she walked down this flight of stairs. There was a dimly lit basement, and there was a mattress on the table, on the floor, nothing else but just a bare mattress. She knew it was going to happen. She just put the bottle of vodka down and ran out of there, and she escaped. She got her document. I don't know how it ended up, but stuff like that happens pretty often. So my friend, by the way, who invited me to Russia, I lost touch with her years ago, but she invited me. She had been raped in Kazakhstan. Not in Russia, in Kazakhstan, while she was coming back home to Moscow. So yeah, stuff like this happens. It was kind of when I was there, it was endemic. All Russian women are raped sometime. And now, you see from my other videos, I'm kind of pro-Russian with the Ukraine situation. You can tell my feeling from the other videos. But this was a time when Russian society had total collapse. This was the fault of U.S. The neoliberal shock therapy, which was enforced on the Russian people, was a crime against humanity. It just devastated Soviet society. Everything broke down. The police were pretty strict in the Soviet period. They wouldn't allow any of that shit to happen. Well, it just broke down, became a total free-for-all gangster state. So that's kind of the situation. I worked for a variety of schools. Schools would come and go. This one school I worked for like 7 months, I think. I had private students. I worked for schools. One school was called the Moscow Center for Professional Development. It was, they had an office and they, a couple of computers and they give you a list of students and stuff. So they had to say that we have a little problem. We can't pay all our students right away. We have a bit of a cash flow problem. So, okay. So waited like week after week after week. And we weren't getting paid, students. And the teachers who were, by the way, most of the teachers I worked with were Americans or Brits, people from the UK. Occasionally Australian or Canadian, mostly Americans or people from the UK. A lot of African students would do this too. They weren't paid as much. They were paid much less than Westerns for doing the same work. Ideally, if they weren't native speakers of English or whatever. But anyway, so the school had wage arrears. We weren't paid in a while. So yeah, okay. No, we will. We'll pay you something. So at one point, I think they owed me something like $2,000. It was going on for a while. Finally, I went into it, like, I can't continue this. I'm very sorry, I won't be able to continue working. Okay, working for you. They gave me something. Now, here's $400. Okay, so I kept working for a little while. I had some of these students. But I talked over with the students, and, something's going on at the school. They're just not paying me, so I made separate arrangements with the students I had. So then, anyway, I went back to the school. Went down for some reason. I went back to the school to see if there was, and the school had gone. In fact, the sign was gone. Any evidence the school was there. The building was locked. Everything was gone. And I told my dad about this. He said, don't push it. They owe you money, but don't. They owe like over $1,000. Don't push it. You might end up doing a funny dance, like I talked about the guy in front of the casino place who was in the parking lot doing a funny dance. Don't push it too much. You might do a funny dance. So I did. This one was chalk it up to experience things. What else? Oh yeah, so there were supermarkets. Yeah, were supermarkets were just starting to come. Apparently, they had first supermarket before in the Soviet period. People used to go do food shopping at a Produkti market, a product market. There was school places where you can buy staples, eggs, butter, whatever. Go in and get a certain amount, you line up and give you some staple. Kind of boring, not a grocery store. And there are also Renox, like outdoor markets, like kind of like a farmer's market type thing. Near where I live was a huge Renox outdoor market. And my Hozeka used to buy most of her, my Maria Fyodorovna used to buy most of her stuff there. By the way, interesting lady, she was in her 70s. Her husband had died in the Second World War. Husband was Jewish. She was religious Russian Orthodox. Husband had been killed in the Second World War. Really sad. She told me I got to understand enough to sort of talk with her. She told me a little bit about her life. She loved Lenin. Her grandparents apparently had been serfs, or not too far from the serfdom era. So Lenin brought a lot of people into this. She loved Lenin. I didn't ask her what she thought about Stalin. I didn't really want to get into that. Maybe I should have. I wish I did. But she loved Lenin. Очень люблю Lenin. She loved Lenin. Brought people into the system. Or you were in serf street like shit for hundreds of years. Brought them into the system. Okay, so what I was talking about, supermarkets had just been introduced a little while before I got there. Originally, they only accepted dollars, U.S. dollars. You had to go and show them your wallet, so you had enough dollars to buy something. Not couldn't just anybody go in there. You had to show. They'd gotten rid of that. There were, I think, a couple of supermarkets. Supermarkets I used to go to once in a while. I think there were Carrefours or French or British chains. I don't remember. Now I think it's a lot different. I mean, people are totally used to supermarkets. It's like a vastly different situation. They picked up on like supply chain technology and methodology, things like that. It's a lot. When I was there, supermarkets were kind of a novelty. Also, like every place where there was money, there were money change money places, or some supermarkets, or there was would be a guy with an AK-47, and it was a little scary. There were guys with AK-47s just about everywhere. McDonald's, there's famous three-story McDonald's on Tverskaya, Ulitsa Tverskaya Street, one of the fashionable shopping areas of Moscow. John Mark Dugan, who was a YouTuber, American ex-Florida cop who was in Moscow. He had a video of that. And I've been there many times. It's still there. They changed management. It's not McDonald's anymore. The McDonald's in Moscow wasn't bad. I mean, I'm not a McDonald's fan. I fucking hate McDonald's. It's crap food. In this country, there's McDonald's in Europe and Russia is actually not bad. Fairly, totally different quality. Stuff in the U.S. is it's like cardboard. Not really good for you. But anyway, so those are some things I encountered in Moscow. Yeah, I went to, by the way, Lenin's tomb. It's there. You know, I saw Vladimir Ilyich Lenin in his tomb. He himself would not have been happy about this, but his tomb was still there. There were some moves to get rid of it, to bury him, but it was opposed by a lot of people, and it's still very much there. You walk in, they hush you up. You're not allowed to take photos inside. You have to be very quiet when you enter. They're very strict guard. They're very strict about it. You walk in, and Lenin himself is a fairly short guy. Very small hands, very short guy. East Asian facial features, somewhat. And it was interesting. There's a cemetery nearby of like socialist martyrs. Brezhnev was there. John Reed was there, one of the founders of the American Communist Party, a journalist, interesting guy. John Reed was there. Some other famous people. It's worthwhile seeing. It's by the wall of the Kremlin. Now, Kremlin means fort. There's St. Basil's Cathedral, which I have in the thumbnail. St. Basil's Cathedral. Americans think that's the Kremlin. It's not. It's St. Basil's Cathedral. I've been inside. It's a lot smaller than it actually looks. The St. Basil's Cathedral. Then the Kremlin is a walled area where the Soviet and the Russian leadership is now. I had a tour of it. It's easy to get like a free tour. There was like I was with a Russian friend of mine, and there was an Israeli tour group. We sort of just joined the tour group, pretending to be part of it, and they led us through it. It was kind of interesting. It was kind of, I don't remember a lot of it, but it was kind of interesting. On the other side of Red Square is GUM, shopping area. I was there. It wasn't terribly interesting. It was like a like high-priced boutiques and luggage stores, like one after the other. Not particularly interesting. I think it's a lot different now. It was an old like 19th century shopping emporium, but it's still there. It's GUM. Apparently, underneath the Kremlin, what I've heard around the time I left, they were building this place called Menage. I haven't been there, but a vast underground shopping mall right under the Kremlin. Apparently, super expensive, super elite for the new Russian League. I didn't go there. I didn't have any interest in going there. English language bookstores. When I first got there, they only had one. But by the time I left, they had like seven or eight. There were more and more English language bookstores. Good place to meet people and hang out. Yeah, there's a growing number of English language bookstores, which is kind of interesting. Old style Russian or Soviet bookstores. Did a lot of them. Stereotype is true. Russian people do like to read. There's some ways, yeah, everybody reading. One of my students said to me, "Look what they're reading, though. They're reading like Stephen King or whatever. Not highbrow literature. They're not reading Dostoevsky or Turgenev, but they are reading. Look at it that way. So anyway, they're Russian-style bookstores. The books are on locked glass case, and you have to ask permission to get it. But that was rapidly changing when I was there. There were lots of bookstores, more and more bookstores. It's very much of a reading culture, unlike the U.S. What else? I traveled a lot when I was in China. I did not travel that much in Russia. I kind of wished I did. I've been to Pskov town, a small city on the border of Latvia. It's really interesting. It's on the border of Lithuania. Really interesting. Birthplace of Pushkin. There's a Pushkin museum there. Interesting town. Really interesting. Apparently during the Soviet period, it was like a sanatorium restaurant. Like elderly women used to go there. It was kind of interesting. And it's a literary town. I went to Latvia once to get my Russian visa renewed. I went to Latvia. Okay, one school, the last school I worked for, I won't mention their name. I really liked them. They liked me. And so they had a thing, you have to get your visa, your residency visa renewed periodically. So the woman who owned the school, by the way, her father had bought it. Her father had worked for the Soviet Foreign Ministry. He knew Gromyko and all these other people. He had some interesting stories to tell. Apparently, he knew a close friend of Andrei Gromyko. I don't know if that's true or not, but he had some really interesting stories to tell. Anyway, he bought this school for his daughter, who ran it. Anyway, this woman, apparently a former teacher or someone, so some connections. This guy, a Russian guy they had arrangement with this Russian guy in Riga, Latvia, who, when you could stay with him, he would help you renew your visa. You could stay with him. He said he was free. You could stay with him. Okay. So when they wanted to try it on me, so I went there. I believe I flew there. I was in Riga for a few days. Really interesting. Guy gave me Andre gave me a tour of Riga. This guy Andre, though, first he was a Mormon, a very religious Mormon. Okay, I'm okay with that. Convert to Mormonism. Also, he wanted money. I originally told the school they'd help out teachers for free, but he wanted money. I paid him. I forget how much I gave him, but for his services, helping getting the visa and all this stuff. So I came back. I told the school about it. This woman who ran the school, she was kind of pissed off. Said I didn't know he was going to ask for money, and she was kind of pissed off by that. But anyway, I have been to Latvia. I have not been to St. Petersburg. I don't know why. I wish I had been there. I will go there. I wish I had been there. Anyway, yeah, so what did I do? So I was there for a little over 3 years. I wanted my parents to visit me. They wouldn't visit me. They did visit me later on. I was in Germany. They did visit me there. It was more Western. They were kind of scared of visiting. I don't know why. I'd write my dad these long letters about what it was like and email him stuff. And I think he got a kick out of it. But he was kind of nervous about me being there towards the end. You can find a job in the U.S. The economy is booming now. You can get a job. You don't have to be there. No, I don't know. I don't want to go back. I have to move back with my parents and back to the dishwashing jobs. I didn't want to do that. So okay, anyway, what happened is, yeah, eventually I was there a little over 3 years. I thought there was going to be a coup. There wasn't actually, but I kind of thought there might be. I've been here a little too long. I gotta get out of here. And what I did is I was confused about what I was going to do next. I went to London. I flew to London, and I had a lot of my stuff from Moscow. Moved to London. I was in the UK for about 6 months, and I had a couple under the table jobs in London. I squatted for a while at this place in Hackney, and I traveled. I stayed at a Buddhist monastery in Pocklington in the north of England for a while. I stayed with a family, somebody I worked with in Moscow. I came back down to London. I was in London total probably about 6 months. I ran out of money, which is pretty easy to do. Easy to do. So I actually got a job. I thought I got it. Now it's hard for Americans to get UK work permit or EU work visa. Americans just can't work in Europe, unfortunately, the way it is. They're really strict about it. One of the few places Americans can work is on a military base. So I was in London, kind of rapidly running out of money, really worried about what I was going to do. I called this place called Garmisch-Partenkirchen, south of Munich. It's a ski resort. It was actually built by the Nazis. It was taken over by the U.S. military. There's a hotel complex. And I called them from London. They said, yeah, I mean, we are hiring people. They couldn't guarantee me a job, but said they're hiring people all the time. And if you're here, come on down. So I did. I actually hitchhiked from London, England to Munich, Germany. People I tell us who don't believe me, but I actually did. I was almost broke too. I got a ride. I was in Dover. Got a ride from London to Dover. I was in Dover for 2 days actually. I got a job across the tunnel, the Channel Tunnel. I told him somebody picked me up who was going to France. I was totally broke. Okay, it was expensive to go through the tunnel, but then they gave me a free ride. Then I got another ride a little ways in France. A young woman who had just broken up with a boyfriend. She was kind of drunk. She was hoping I could drive. I didn't have an international driver's license, but she drove me a little ways. France was a horrible country to hitchhike through, but I eventually got to Germany. It took me. I borrowed some money from my parents at a couple places along the way. So I got to Munich. It took me like 5 days. I finally got a job. I paid back my parents and everything, but I finally got a job. I was working at the von Steuben Hotel in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. It's a U.S. Army hotel. I was basically cleaning hotel rooms and stuff for 7 months. It was a dormitory that gave me a place to live. It was an odd situation, just really, really odd. I was there for 7 months, and then I got a job. A friend of mine, I made a couple of friends there, who, there's a newspaper called Stars and Stripes. Now, by the way, I hate the fucking military. I was left-wing back then, although I didn't know a lot about his socialist history or political theory, but I was pretty left-wing back then, and I still am now. So, I hate the military, and I felt odd being in a military environment, but, there's this place, the hotel, like, my coworkers were like, American backpackers who, basically ran out of money like I did. They're American backpackers doing different things in a few places in Europe an American can work. So I was kind of underemployed, but anyway. So a friend of mine told me about this job. They were advertising in Stars and Stripes, the U.S. military newspaper, that they were hiring, if you had a master's degree, to work as a guidance counselor, civilian guidance counselor. Central Texas College, located in Fort Hood and Killeen, Texas, was hiring these people. I didn't have to go to Texas. I was just there. So I actually sent them my resume to see what was going to happen, and they hired me. They gave me some training. It was better than cleaning hotel rooms. I felt uneasy. The job was to be a guidance counselor to Army people, Army guys who were working on a degree. It was a very oddest job, one of the oddest jobs I've had. So they gave me 2 weeks or a week of training in Frankfurt, Germany on this base. And then they sent me to Bosnia. I was in Bosnia, central Bosnia, a place called Tuzla, Maine, and then a place called Fort Demi. It was one of the oddest places. We went through Croatia overnight. This was a little while after war had ended. You could see some bombed out villages. It was really eerie when we got into Bosnia. And I was in this camp for 5 months, really claustrophobic. They let us out a couple times. There's some really eerie, odd stories there, which I'll save for another time. Very claustrophobic environment. Anyway, I worked with some Army guys. I really didn't have to do a lot. To some extent, it was a make clerk job. I was there for 5 months. They paid pretty well. Free food. I gained a lot of weight, unfortunately, but free food. And after it was over, I traveled in Eastern Europe a bit more. Anyway, yeah, I forgot to mention earlier when I'd been in Moscow, I made like 4 big trips, 2 in Eastern Europe, 2 in Western Europe. I'd come back to Moscow, work some more, make some more money. Okay, so I was after I left Bosnia, I was in Prague for a while. Great city, I love Prague, beautiful architecture, cheap beer. Admittedly, during this period, I was probably drinking a little too much, but cheap beer, great beer. Packed with tourists, American and German tourists, which took away from a lot of it. Okay, so anyway, that's the situation. There's more. I'm sure I'm leaving a lot out. Whatever, every video I've made, something I wish I had said that. But that's some of my experiences in Moscow. Now, I know it comes off as negative. This was a time Russia had facing utter social collapse. What I've heard, it's a lot different now, and look like what I've seen was a boomtown. I don't know about the rest of Russia, and you know how I feel about the Ukraine conflicts in my earlier videos. So I'm not bashing Russia, how horrible Russia is. Russia was a victim, I say, of the neoliberalism Naomi Klein talks about in the shock doctrine was really a crime imposed on Russia, imposed on the Russian working class, was a crime against humanity. Okay, I hope you enjoy. If you like my video, please like and subscribe, or subscribe anyway. Helps me build the channel, and thank you very much.